Have you ever felt a chill run down your spine when something goes bump in the night? Imagine this. It is late in the night in 1977, a quiet house in North London. Suddenly, there is violent knocks on the walls and a heavy wooden dresser scrapes across the floor on its own, as if pushed by invisible hands. You rush to your children's bedroom and you find them huddled in a corner, wide-eyed and shaking. And then, right in front of you, the dresser slides forward again, trying to trap the girls in the room. Sounds like a scene from a horror movie, right? But for the Hodgson family of Enfield, this was real life. This is the true story of the Enfield poltergeist, the infamous case that inspired The Conjuring 2, and trust me, the reality might be even stranger and scarier than the movie. Let's start with the family at the heart of this mystery. Peggy Hodgson was a single mother raising 4 kids in a modest council house at 284 Green Street in Enfield, London. Her daughters, Margaret 13 and Janet 11, they shared a room, and her 2 younger sons, Johnny and Billy, were just kids. They were an ordinary family until the night of August 30th, 1977, when the extraordinary burst into their lives. Peggy initially thought that the kids were just roughhousing when she heard commotion in the girls' bedroom. But when she opened the door, she found Margaret and Janet cowering in fear, the furniture moving by itself. Peggy herself witnessed a chest of drawers wobble and slide away from the wall as if pushed by unseen hands. She tried to shove it back, but it wouldn't budge, almost as if invisible force was resisting her. Frightened out of their wits, the Hodgsons ran next door to their neighbors, Vic and Peggy Nottingham, for help. Vic marched into the house to investigate, because who wouldn't want to play Ghostbuster at 1 o'clock in the morning, right? Yeah, he heard strange knocking sounds echoing from the walls too. Doesn't it sound fun? Just a little party at your neighbor's house? Demons? Great. It wasn't just the Hodgson kids' imagination. Something truly bizarre was happening in that house. Not knowing what else to do, Peggy Hodgson called the police. And here's where things get officially spooky. Even a police constable who responded reported seeing a chair wobble and then slide on the floor with no obvious cause. Think about that. A seasoned police officer watching a chair move without anyone near it. The officer even signed an affidavit about this later, but after a thorough check of the premises, the police were literally stumped. No burglars, no intruders, literally no explanation. One officer basically said, well, something moved that chair, but it's not exactly a police matter. I can imagine the cops scratching their heads and likely thinking, ghosts? Not in our job description. Amen. That's in mine. Stay away from my business. This was just one night of what would become a nearly 18-month ordeal for the Hodgson family. As a friend telling the story, I want you to really picture it. A hardworking single mom and her kids in a tiny home, suddenly thrown into a real-life nightmare. They have no idea what's going on, only that it's terrifying. In Margaret's words, years later, we didn't understand what was happening. It's frightening. We didn't like to be on our own in the house. And who could blame them? Furniture was moving by itself, knocks and bangs in empty rooms, and the Hodgsons were desperate and scared. Little did they know that their household was about to become the center of one of the most famous paranormal cases in history. After those first disturbances, things in the Hodgson house went from weird to utterly off the freaking charts, my dude. The activity escalated quickly, almost as if whatever poltergeist, ghost, or force was there wanted more and more attention. Loud knocks continued at night, often in patterns of 3 or 4 raps that would travel from wall to wall. Objects, they literally started flying across the rooms with alarming aim. In fact, when the Hodgsons reached out to the press for help, a Lego brick zoomed through the air. Oh no, a poltergeist! Definitely not Atom! A Lego brick zoomed through the air and smacked a photographer in the actual face, leaving him with a notable bruise. How hard does a Lego have to be thrown at you to get a bruise on your face? That's hard. I don't know. By this point, the story had attracted the attention of a reporter and photographer from the Daily Mirror, a major British newspaper. At first, when the news crew arrived, the house was quiet. Embarrassingly quiet for hours. You can imagine the Hodgsons' anxiety, like, of course, the ghosts decide to play dead when the reporters show up. The reporters were packing up to leave, thinking that this was all a wild goose chase, when bam, that Lego incident happened right in front of them. The poltergeist had made its presence known in dramatic ass fashion. With that startling proof, the Daily Mirror folks said, okay, something really is going on in here, and they contacted the Society for Psychical Research, SPR. The SPR, it was like Ghostbusters of the real world, a group of researchers who investigate the paranormal claims. They dispatched Maurice Grosse, an inventor turned paranormal investigator, to Green Street.
Would that be Grossi?
Grossi. Let's say Grossi. For the rest of this, we're calling him Grossi. Sorry. To Green Street to study the case. When Grossi arrived early in September 1977, things really hit a new level of strange. Over the next few days and weeks, new phenomena kept the family and investigators on edge. Grossi reported witnessing over 2,000 separate paranormal events in that house. That's a lot, okay? Whoa. And we're talking furniture flipping over by itself, cups of water appearing mysteriously filled and thrown, sudden cold breezes, and foul smells. Not farts, ghosts, okay? Even small fires igniting spontaneously on shelves only to extinguish on their own. Bed sheets would be ripped off empty beds, and toys would zoom across the rooms like missiles. Neighbors would come by, drawn by the commotion, and end up witnessing heavy armchairs tipping over without anyone near. On one occasion, an enormous cast iron fireplace and an entire bed were found flipped on their side in an upstairs bedroom. These were far too heavy for the young kids to move, yet there they were, tossed about like doll furniture. Honestly, if I hadn't heard of these witness accounts, I probably would have thought they were making this up too. And we can't forget Janet. Janet was an 11-year-old, and she was at the epicenter of all of this. As weeks went by, Janet began to fall into weird trance-like states. She would wake up in strange places, like on top of a dresser or down at the bottom of the stairs. Oh my God, there's a demon in me, I don't sleepwalk. Adam, call the Daily Mirror. She had no memory of how she got to these places. Ding ding, same. She started speaking in gravelly, creepy old man voice that literally no little girl should be able to produce. Imagine your tween daughter suddenly starts talking like a grumpy old man who chain smokes cigars. Why is all of this resonating with me?
I don't know, baby. Let's figure it out.
I need to go to bed. The voice claimed to be Bill Wilkins, a spirit of a man who had died in that very house years before. In fact, the voice coming out of Janet's mouth famously rasped.
Days before I died, I went blind. Then I had an hemorrhage, and I fell asleep, and I died in a chair in the corner downstairs.
Creepy, right? Later on, a man who heard the recordings of this voice recognized it and said it sounded just like his father, William Bill Wilkins, who indeed had lived in the Hodgin homes years prior and had died of a freaking hemorrhage in that freaking chair. Guys, and the details match because Bill Wilkins had gone blind due to the hemorrhage that caused his death at 284 Green Street in 1963. Long before the Hodgins family had moved in. The family insists that they did not know about Bill Wilkins at the time, so either an 11-year-old girl was somehow privy to this morbid trivia, or is pulling an elaborate prank with a voice that sounded eerily adult, or perhaps it honestly is something paranormal. Imagine hearing that raspy voice echoing in the dark of night from your child's room, a voice that isn't theirs. Imagine Janet's mother hearing her little girl growl out the words of a dead man. At times, researchers even filled Janet's mouth with water to see if she could still talk without using vocal cords. And unbelievably, that deep voice still emanated, gurgling out words without her lips moving. How do you explain that? You can't. I know you can't. The poltergeist activity seemed to target Janet the most, levitating her into the air on several occasions, as witnessed by neighbors and even a lollipop lady, that's a crossing guard in London apparently, outside, who claimed she saw Janet floating inside her bedroom window. Famous photographs show Janet apparently levitating above her bed mid-scream while her sisters are in the room with looks of alarm. Skeptics later noted that the photos could just be Janet jumping off her bed, and indeed they do show her in mid-air with limbs astrew, like a kid who might have bounced off the mattress. But witnesses insist that she was thrown by an unseen force, and that she sometimes landed in weird places, like on top of a dresser, which is not consistent with a simple jump. The most frightening moment for Janet herself, she later said it was when a curtain wrapped itself around her neck when she was in bed, choking her, as if some entity was trying to strangle her. Her mother had raced in and ripped the curtain away before her daughter could be harmed. Fires that started would stop, and water would appear out of nowhere. Heavy furniture was levitating, disembodied voices, attempted stranglings. This is stuff of nightmares or movies. And it was happening nightly in Enfield. Eyewitnesses and investigators said this really honestly did happen. And as the strange happenings continued, more people got involved, drawn by either curiosity or a genuine desire to help this poor family. What makes the Enfield case stand out is how many eyewitnesses there were. We're not relying on just the family's word. Over 30 people eventually claimed that they saw or heard something inexplicable in the house. Neighbors, journalists, the mailman, police officers, psychic researchers, and even the lollipop lady. They all became a part of this story. Foremost among the investigators were Maurice Grosset and Guy Lyon Playfair, members of the Society for Psychical Research, who effectively moved in with the Hodgsons for long stretches. Grosset was an approachable, down-to-earth guy, and he had a personal motivation. He had tragically lost his own daughter not too long before, and some say he was hoping to find proof of the afterlife. Guy Lyon Playfair was a journalist turned ghost hunter who would later write a book about the cases titled "This House is Haunted." These two men became like unofficial uncles to the Hodgsons kids, trying to protect them and document the phenomenon at the same time. Grosset and Playfair spent over a year on the case, logging incidents, trying to catch poltergeists in action. They recorded hours upon hours of audio, including those creepy Bill Wilkins voice sessions. Grosset even devised clever little tests, like scattering flour on the floor to see if furniture had moved by itself, or if somebody was sneaking in to push it. No human footprints were ever found in the flour, by the way, and some of the chairs still did move. They kept cameras rolling and continually challenged the entity to perform on cue. Sometimes it obliged, sometimes it didn't. Ghosts don't exactly perform like trained seals, but Grosset said that in total, he had witnessed more than 2,000 freaking paranormal incidents in that house, okay? He described seeing doors slam shut with no wind, marbles and toys jumping off the floor, often warm to the touch immediately after, which is very weird. I guess ghosts are like a microwave. Chairs tumbled, drawers opening by themselves, and of course, hearing that gruff, disembodied voice echoing from the walls. Despite being believers, Grosset and Playfair were not entirely gullible. In fact, they caught the children trying to cheat on a few occasions and weren't shy about it. Once Grosset walked in to find Janet banging a broom handle on the ceiling to fake knocking sounds. Another time, a hidden video camera caught Janet bending spoons, a classic prank, and attempting to bend an iron bar, presumably to fool investigators that it was telekinesis at work. See? Sometimes you're bad kids. I think it's a little bit of both. We're gonna see. Whenever the girls faked something and got caught, Grosset and Playfair would scold them, like strict dads, obviously. Janet later admitted that yes, she and her siblings had faked maybe 2% of the phenomenon just to test the investigators or see if they could get away with the joke. In their words, oh yeah, once or twice we faked phenomenon just to see if Mr. Grosset and Mr. Playfair would catch us, Janet confessed. They always did. And 98% of the time, the weird stuff was real. And even the little pranks that they attempted were quickly busted. Interesting. The case also attracted big names in the paranormal world, most notably Ed and Lorraine Warren. Yes, the famed American demonologist couple portrayed in the Conjuring films. They made a cameo in this story too. In real life, the Warrens showed up briefly in Enfield in 1978, and by all accounts, their visit was a short one. Ed Warren was fully convinced it was a demonic haunting, saying, "No doubt about it, those who deal with the supernatural know the phenomena are here." But British investigator Guy Playfair later recalled, with a bit of British dry humor, that Ed also tried to persuade them that there was money to be made from this case. Book deals, movie rights, the whole works. Playfair claims Ed essentially said this could be a gold mine, and then the Warrens left. So, while the Warrens publicly stood by the Hodgsons haunting as real, some UK researchers viewed them as, well, a tad opportune. A tad opportunistic. What is it? Say it.
Just go.
In fact, one skeptical analysis bluntly noted that Ed Warren was notorious for exaggerating and even making up incidents, often transforming a haunting into a demonic possession. Ouch. Regardless, the Warrens' brief appearance at Enfield has been greatly embellished in fiction. In The Conjuring 2, they basically are the main heroes, but in reality, they were minor players in the heavy lifting that was done by the folks like Grosset, Playfair, and the daily journalists on the scene night after night. Whether it was a ghost, a telekinetic teen, or some combination, Morris, like Grosset and Playfair, were convinced the events were real. It was the strangest thing. It was all true, he insisted. Absolutely everything that happened was true. They couldn't have made it up. They were a very poor family who were frightened to death and just wanted this to stop. For a hardened news photographer to say that on the record is pretty striking. By early 1979, after roughly a year and a half of chaos, the phenomenon finally quieted down. Janet, at the epicenter, was sent away from home for a while, first to a mental hospital for evaluation, where, notably, then the activity had paused, and later to live with a family friend. Perhaps that separation helped calm things. Eventually, the poltergeist episode simply ended, as abruptly as it had begun, which is super common with poltergeists. No definitive, here's the ghost climax. It just stopped. And from the get-go, the Enfield poltergeist was a media sensation. We often hear about ghost stories that only come out years later, but this one hit the newspapers in literally real time. The Daily Mirror ran the initial exclusive, splashing the story, The House of Strange Happenings, across its pages. The public was hooked. Soon other papers like the Daily Mirror and The Sun followed their own headlines. But the Hodgson home became a bit of a circus. Journalists, photographers, self-proclaimed experts, and curiosity seekers gathered at the outside of 284 Green Street, hoping to catch a glimpse of flying furniture or ghostly action. British national newspapers covered the case regularly until 1979, when reports finally died down. This was the late 1970s. No internet babies, no Twitter, no viral TikToks, no Instagram reels. Yet, the Enfield case became world famous through good old-fashioned press and TV coverage. It got to the point that any mention of the poltergeist on TV or radio would bring up the Enfield as a prime example. There were radio interviews. One particularly spine-tingling moment came when the Hodgsons and Maurice Grosset were on the LBC radio show, playing a tape of Bill's voice.
Come on, say it for me, Dr. Bello.
Dr. Bello.
When a caller phoned in to say that he recognized the voice as his dead father, which we know is Bill Wilkins. Can you imagine listening to the radio and realizing the ghost that everyone is talking about is your freaking dad? And of course, that literally made headlines too. Public reaction at the time was split, much like it is today and when any of these cases get attention. Many people are fascinated and sympathetic to the Hodgsons. Here was a normal family thrust into the spotlight by something utterly bizarre and terrifying. Neighbors and strangers sent supportive letters or dropped off toffees for the frightened children, as if dealing with a ghost was hard to recover from, just like an illness. But there was also skepticism and ridicule. The tabloids, while sensationalizing the story, also ran jerky cartoons about flying teacups. Some skeptics accused the Hodgson children of being little actresses, seeking fame, or suggested that Peggy Hodgson was an overwhelmed mom concocting a story to get better government housing. It got quite nasty in some press quarters. Yet, despite the doubters, no one ever definitively debunked all the evidence. There were just too many independent witnesses and recordings that the case couldn't be entirely dismissed. Even those who thought the girls' fake stuff had to concede something unusual had happened in the house. One journalist wrote that whether it was real or not, the Enfield poltergeist had a tremendous impact on the entire generation of children who grew up hearing about it. It became the ghost story everyone knew. Kids would dare each other to repeat the Enfield ghost said or play with Ouija boards. Bad idea, by the way. Janet herself admitted that she had played with a Ouija board shortly before the haunting began. The name Enfield poltergeist entered into pop culture. Alright, now let's address the big ghostly elephant in the room. Was the Enfield poltergeist a hoax? It's important to examine the skeptic side of the story. Even if I am a believer at heart, Healthy skepticism keeps us all honest. After all, professional skeptics and magicians also weighed in. Melbourne's Christopher, a famous American stage magician and paranormal debunker, dropped by the Enfield house. He spent a whole day there and observed nothing paranormal at all. In fact, he was just put off by how suspicious Janet's behavior was and concluded the poltergeist was nothing more than the antics of a little girl who was very, very clever. Another magician, Joe Nickel from the U.S. Committee for Skeptics, he inquired and studied the case from afar and pointed out some solid critiques. For one, he noted that many incidents happened when the girls were alone or not closely watched. For example, the famous levitation photos that we've talked about. Those were taken by a remote camera with no one else in the room and at the exact second that they had occurred. Then there's the voice. A ventriloquist named Ray Allen visited Janet and concluded that her demonic voice was nothing more than a vocal trick. Essentially, a good ventriloquism or using false vocal cords to test her. Researchers did creative experiments like the water in the mouth test, as mentioned, and asking her to speak with her mouth taped, though she might have just spoken through her nose. Still, skeptics argue that while her voice is eerie, an 11-year-old girl could learn how to produce deep voice with practice, especially when it got her a lot of attention and got the pesky reporters to go, wow. Skeptics pointed to the physiological and psychological factors. Some suggested Janet's puberty and family, and stress, a single mom, tight finances, could have led to her unconscious psychological effects, or simply a desire to spice up their dull life with mischief. A big but, things like puberty can also bring on a poltergeist. One psychologist noted how people see what they want to see in uncontrolled situations. A room full of believers in the dark hearing a noise might convince each other it is a ghost, whereas in daylight with clear observation, it might turn out to be the plumbing. Indeed, no rigorous scientific control was applied in Enfield. This was a family home, not a tech lab. Deborah Hyde, a notable skeptic, said that there is not a single piece of solid evidence because occurrences didn't happen under controlled circumstances. People frequently see what they expect to see, shaped by their prior beliefs. That's a fair point. Confirmation bias can make true believers out of even smart people when spooks are afoot. There's also infamous bit of audio where the investigators left a tape recorder running and it did catch Janet and Margaret giggling and seeming to hatch a plan to trick the researchers. Essentially caught red-handed, and the audio, when confronted, the girls said that they were just joking around about how they could fool the adults, not actually doing it. An important note to make is that once the press and the researchers stopped hanging around, the haunting basically stopped. Could it be just without an audience, the girls had no reason to keep it up? Or is it that the entity's energy faded as Janet grew older? A cynic would say the timing is suspicious. Finally, skeptics often highlight that no conclusive photo or film ever captured the poltergeist in the act, only aftermaths. The best that we have are those levitation shots, which again are super debatable, and many creepy audio recordings. But in an age where some other hauntings have yielded convincing videos or clear EVPs, Enfield's evidence is just tantalizing and ambiguous. It is just enough to make you wonder, but not enough to prove anything. When the movie studio was making The Conjuring 2, they even brought Janet and Margaret back to the old house in Enfield in 2016 for a visit. The sisters stood outside for the cameras, now much older, and reflected on that crazy chapter of their childhood. "It's very strange being back," Janet had said, looking at her former home. After Peggy Hodgson's death, a new family briefly lived in the Green Street house. They reportedly knew nothing of the history, which is honestly a very weird, serious omission by the landlord. The mom, Claire, later said that she felt uncomfortable in the house, as if somebody was always looking at her. Her sons, interesting, would wake up at night hearing people talking downstairs when nobody was ever even there. When the family eventually learned about the events of 1977, it suddenly clicked why they might have felt uneasy. They moved out after just 2 months, unable to shake the creeps. To be clear, they didn't witness anything flying or anything dramatic, but a lingering presence and feeling. And today, another family does live there, and by all accounts, they have experienced no disturbances at all, and wisely don't invite journalists in to poke around. Maybe whatever haunted the place has finally moved on for good, or maybe the poltergeist was only ever tied to the Hodgson kids and this particular moment in time. So I know you are all probably wondering, what do I think about this? And I'll be honest, the story does give me the chills. I am a believer when it comes to the paranormal, at least. I do believe that not everything in our world fits neatly into scientific explanations that we have made. The Enfield poltergeist case captivates me because it wasn't just a bump in the night or one witness. It was month after month after month of weirdness with a crowd of people seeing it all unfold. As a friend of yours, I will tell you that I believe something very strange really did happen in that house. Of course, I do have my skeptical moments too. It's kind of like believing your friend's fishing story, even though you know they tend to exaggerate. You think, okay, the fish wasn't that big, but you definitely caught something. I suspect that the Hodgson kids, being kids, added some embellishments, and they admitted to as much. Maybe they banged a broom to stir things up when activity was slow, or jumped off the bed pretending to be spirits. Those bits don't shock me. They were under unimaginable pressure, living in a haunted house and under media scrutiny. If I was 11 and could fool a bunch of grown-ups, maybe I would have tried it too. So yes, I think a few of the Enfield events were fake, but in the core of it, the truly bizarre stuff that multiple sane adults witnessed, I don't think that was faked. There are just too many reports of the same events from different credible people. When a police officer, a reporter, and a neighbor all see a chair move, now that is a hard one to sweep underneath the rug. When recordings exist of a voice that no little girl should physically be able to produce for hours on end, that raises an eyebrow. This case makes me feel a mix of awe and unease. Awe because even if a part of it was genuine paranormal event, then it means that our world is a lot stranger than we often admit. It makes me wonder about the nature of reality. Was it a ghost, a demon, some unexplained psychic ability? And it gives me unease because for the Hodgsons, this wasn't cool or fun. This was traumatic. A part of me feels protective over little Janet and Margaret, even all these years later. They didn't ask to become the center of a phenomenon. Whether you think they summoned something with a Ouija board, or if it was a collective energy of a tense household, or plain fakery, those kids went through hell for a while. The fear in their eyes in these photos were real. Enfield also makes me want to reflect on how we deal with the unknown. Some people ought to believe the wildest stories. Others automatically dismiss anything as a hoax or hysteria. I stay curious. I wasn't there, so I can't know for sure what happened. But after digging into these first-hand accounts, I find it hard to believe that it was all made up. And I'll admit, I also love a good ghost story, and the Enfield poltergeist is one of the best because it is messy and human and spooky as heck. But it is not a tidy Hollywood tale. It is full of contradictions and drama. In a weird way, it makes it feel more authentic. Real life is messy, and if I were conducting a hoax, I would probably try to make everything line up neatly. The Enfield story, however, is all over the place, both incredibly convincing and at times head-scratchingly dubious, just like a real-life haunting might be. In the end, whether you are a headline skeptic or a true believer or somewhere in between, the Enfield poltergeist leaves me with lingering questions. I think that's why it endures. People are still fascinated by it, still arguing at the pub or the internet forums about, hey, did Janet throw a teapot or was it a ghost? So what do you think happened at that house in Enfield? Was it a clever prank by two imaginative girls that snowballed way out of their control? Or was it a case of collective hysteria fueled by willing media? Or did a restless spirit, maybe old Bill Wilkins or something else, truly torment this family for a year and a half? The Enfield poltergeist is a mystery that we may never fully solve. And maybe that's okay. It reminds us that the world can stay a very mysterious place. And as I turn off the lights tonight, I will be pondering those knocks on the walls and the voice in the darkness, and this family's ordeal that has kept us talking about it for nearly half a century. So thank you all for joining me for this episode of The Haunted Estate and on this deep dive into the unknown. Stay curious, stay open-minded, and next time you hear something go bump in the night, well, it might just be the pipes. Maybe it's not. So sweet dreams. Stay spooky, Boo Crew.